Now, somebody who's been watching all of this, the politics, the fact we've got a new Prime Minister and a new monarch in 1 week, is serving Member of Parliament from Lichfield and friend of GB News, I think it's fair to say, Michael Fabricant. Michael, if I'd said to you, you know, all of this was going to happen in the space of, and there we were on Tuesday with the Queen, there she was, photographed with Liz Truss, and within 48 hours, all of these things have happened. Quite an extraordinary week, isn't it?
An extraordinary week indeed, and quite a shock to everyone. I was in the chamber when the message is London Bridge is down was passed along the government and Labour front benches. And I didn't see to begin with what the message was, but I saw the look in the eyes of Keir Starmer and then later on the Prime Minister. And it's tragic, of course, and the thought that, you know, just only 2 days earlier, the Prime Minister was meeting the Queen for the first time in her new position is unbelievable. It's sort of like a Jeffrey Archer novel, isn't it?
Michael, isn't there something rather wonderful, even slightly beautiful about it? That right at the end of her life, in the last few hours of her life, she was still doing what she'd done for more than 70 years. She was still doing her duty and giving service. Isn't there something rather wonderful about that?
And that's what the wonderful thing is, isn't it, about the Queen? The fact that she dedicated her life, 70 years and more, to the service of her country. And, you know, there's been an extraordinary proclamation by the President of the United States, which is completely unheard of, bearing in mind that the United States does not have the Queen, unlike Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some other overseas realms, as head of state. He has issued a proclamation today, and I'll read a tiny bit of it, if I may. It says, "As a mark of respect for the memory of Queen Elizabeth II, by the authority vested in me as President of the United States by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, I hereby order that the flag of the United States shall be flown at half-staff at the White House and upon all public buildings and grounds, at all military posts and naval stations, and all naval vessels of the federal government," and it goes on and on and on. "I also direct that the flag shall be flown at half-staff for the same length of time at all United States embassies, legations, consular offices, and other facilities abroad, including all military facilities." And what's particularly interesting is this will be from immediately today until sunset on the day of interment. And in fact, what that means in practice is that the United States will be in mourning for our Queen for as long a period as we are in the United Kingdom. And I think that's unprecedented.
Yeah. It's unprecedented. It's also completely and utterly extraordinary because, of course, unlike Canada and Australia and New Zealand and some Caribbean countries still and others, of course, it was a row with a previous British monarch that, of course, caused the colonies to go their own way in the first place.
Yes, and I think they've been regretting it ever since, actually. I know so many Americans they would rather have Queen and now maybe the King as head of state than the particular president. And of course, that's the marvelous system we have in the United Kingdom. The fact, as you mentioned earlier, and Aunt Pickles mentioned earlier, that the Queen's role is completely separate from all the bickering that goes on in politics.
Yes.
And that's why she can be above it all and speak for all the nation. Whereas a president, whether it be of the United States or India or wherever else, because they're politicians, they're unable to do so.
Yes, I mean, it's a question, isn't it? You know, if you have an apolitical head of state, you either have a clapped-out politician or you have a monarch. And it's only really America and France, isn't it, that have this president that is sort of all-powerful. You know, the French Prime Minister, frankly, barely exists. I'm fascinated, Michael, by the note, and you described being in the Commons. You know, the note said London Bridge is down. It was noticeable that on the BBC, there were presenters wearing black ties by lunchtime, and yet we don't get an official confirmation and statement until about 6:30. Do you think the reality is that they waited until all the family had got to Balmoral and that actually she died much, much earlier in the day?
Yes, I do. And in fact, there's been precedents for this, haven't there, with the death of King George VI and others. And that's not unusual. But I don't think she died at midday. I think it was a little bit later. But certainly it was a whole serious issue, as we know. And I think it was a number of hours before it was publicly announced. Certainly, I know that at GB News, Darren McCaffrey and I were talking. He expected an announcement round about 6 o'clock, and I think it came in round about 6:12 in the evening. But that's understandable. They wanted to have the family around them first. An interesting thing that I have been thinking about, at least I think it's interesting, is the age of our new king, King Charles III. I think it's actually an advantage to him that he's that age. I don't know about you, but I've heard time and time again the expression, she, the Queen, has been the grandmother to the nation. And I think if it had been a young prince ascending to the throne, I think the transition might have been rather more difficult. I think people are used to it being not an elder statesman, but an elder monarch. And by having someone mature, like King Charles III, in his 70s, I think will make the transition so much easier. And incidentally, didn't you think, as I did, that the King's speech was so marvellous today? Or maybe we should say King's address. I mean, we talk about King's speech because of the movie of his grandfather.
Michael, I'm with you. I thought it was terrific. I thought he delivered it beautifully. I thought there was the right amount of emotion in there. There was a lot of him in there. You might criticise it mildly by saying it was a little bit long, but he did declare he was going to be apolitical, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, he said in an earlier interview some years ago, you know, I'm not a fool. I do know that I've got to behave differently as monarch as I do from, as he was then, the Prince of Wales. I thought there was something else as well, which commentators haven't talked about, and that was his affirming his deep faith and being head of the Church of England. Because if you recall, some years ago, he said, I don't want to be defender of the faith. I want to be defender of faith. And it's quite clear that he's decided that...
He's reaffirmed his Christianity, but quite how that coronation service goes remains to be seen. Michael Fabricant, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, in particular, those moments, those dramatic moments in the House of Commons.
Thank you.
Yesterday.